Right now, it's often hard to separate actually useful features from AI hype. Airtable just announced a big new refresh that makes them an AI native software. But what does that actually mean? In this video, I've rounded up all of the current AI features, and I'll go through which ones are actually useful and which ones you might want to ignore for now. I build Airtable Basics with clients every day, from small businesses up to companies with thousands of employees. And if you would like some more personalized help on a project, I offer services for that, and you can find out more about them in the video description below. Let's get started. There are 4 places within Airtable where you can access AI: writing formulas, field agents, AI within automations, and lastly, the general assistant called Omni. We're going to go through these one by one. So first, let's talk about writing formulas. AI in general is great for writing code, writing formulas, all that kind of stuff. And for me, I actually, when I do need it, I most often just go to ChatGPT and will ask it something like, I need to write an Airtable formula that does this. But Airtable does also have that ability natively. So I'm in this Airtable base, which has a list of popular movies, their release date, and a synopsis about each movie. And then there's also a table that shows the year that each movie was released in. And let's say that I want to know the month. I want to have a separate field that shows the month that each movie was released in. So I can reference this release date, but I need a formula that's going to pull the month for that. So I'll go here and I want to create a formula field type. And then I can go ahead and click this Create Formula with AI button. And then I'm going to say, create a formula that takes an input. And then in quotations, I'm going to say the exact name of the field that I want to reference, release date, and outputs the month in long format. So I'm hoping that it understands that to mean, like, I want it to say September. So I'm going to go ahead and press enter. And it did that perfectly. So we want a date time format function that takes the release date and then gives it the long month format. So if I go ahead and create the field, then it will do that. So that one's a small little feature, but it can come in very, very handy when you have a complicated formula that you have to write. And often the more complicated it is, the more useful this is, even if you do know how to write it. I've been writing formulas for years now, and so typically I don't need the AI to do it, but I will still ask it to do it if it's something that I know I'm going to have to use like 4 different nested functions. Maybe it has to do with time zones or something like that. It just makes it a lot easier and quicker to do. All right, next up is AI agents. And I've actually created a separate video that you can watch specifically on creating field agents for tagging single and multi-select field types. I'm going to go through here and talk about all of the different field types you can use with AI. So if I go ahead and click plus, the first thing I want to point out is that we've got these new suggestions up here before we choose which field type we want. And honestly, these are a little bit annoying to me because I just feel like they add a little bit of confusion. Like when you click one of these, what it's going to do is it's going to create, one of these field types for the specific purpose that you have clicked. And so it can be an easy way to quick start, or if you're not familiar with AI, using these AI features, it can be a quick way to start out. But once you get a hang of it, it's a little bit annoying that these are still there and still in your way. But here I'm actually going to move over to the documentation because that lists all of the fields where we can use AI. So formula field, we already went over that. And after that, we move into the field agent fields, the fields that can be used as what they call a field agent. So that would be a long text field, a linked record field, single and multiple select fields, and then number-based fields like number, currency, or percentages. So let's do a couple examples of these and you'll quickly get a hang of how this works. I would say, because I promised you some analysis on which ones are most and least useful within Airtable, I would say that these field agents are by far the most useful, and you can just get so much value out of these. So just like a couple examples would be, let's say that you have feedback. So think like Google reviews. Maybe your company collects reviews from customers and you have hundreds of reviews, and you want to categorize them by which ones are positive, negative, or neutral. You could create a single select field powered by AI that reads each of those reviews and then tags them as positive, negative, or neutral. Another example of something that might be useful is maybe you track receipts in Airtable. And so you have an attachment field where people can drop in a receipt and then track that, but they also need to enter the number into a currency field so that it can be added up, etc. If those receipts have been scanned with OCR software into a PDF that actually has, digital text within it, Airtable can actually read that, and you could prompt the AI to look and find the total of the receipt and then enter that into that field. And one interesting one is linked records. So linked records are our field types where we establish relationships from one table to another. So in our example here, we have a relationship between movies and years. This movie, Doolittle, was released in 2020, and so it is linked to the 2020 year. And if I go to 2020 here, I can see Doolittle listed. Now, let's say that Doolittle has not been linked yet. We can actually have AI not automatically link it, but suggest what it thinks would be the right link. And this is a really simple case. We actually could create a formula just like this that outputs the year, and then have an automation actually automatically link to 2020 here. And so if I actually wanted, the best design of this space, I would probably do that. But as an example of how these suggestions might work, and the suggestions are really helpful when it's not as clear cut as this, when you might have a few different options that are similar, but you want to pick one, we can have AI actually suggest the right option. So if I open up this years field, I can go ahead and click Use AI to show top matches when selecting a record. And then it asks me which fields I want to use to compare these two items. So in this case, in the movie, I want to look at the release date. And in the year, I want to look at the name, because this name is going to say 2020. The release date is going to have 2020 as part of the date. And so hopefully between those two, it's going to understand and recommend the correct one. So I go ahead and click Save, Confirm Change. And it took a little bit for it to index it, but now when I click the plus here, I can see that 2020 is the first suggested option, and I can easily click it. All right, so going back to our list here, we had formula, which we've done. We did linked records. So we've got long text, select, and number-based fields. And the text, select, and then numbers are really the bread and butter of these field agents. These are where probably you're going to be using them the most and getting the most value out of. So let's do an example of doing a long text field. So you see this synopsis here. This synopsis is just a long text field, but maybe we don't have the synopsis yet. So if I go ahead and delete this and recreate it, I want to create a synopsis for each of these movies. So I'm going to go ahead and make a long text field, and then I will click this button down here to convert it to automate it with an agent. And when I do that, then I get the AI configuration options. So let's call this synopsis. And then I've got these two options here. One is enable internet search, which means allow it to search the internet for this information. And the second is run automatically, which means do I want, anytime a new movie is created, do I want it to automatically run the synopsis, or do I want to manually click a button to have it run the synopsis? And one consideration with this run automatically toggle is thinking about credit usage. And if you have it on automatic, it's gonna use more AI credits because you're not controlling when it runs and when it doesn't run. And so usually The reason why you would leave it off would just be to save credits. You can always turn it on later, so I usually start with it off. So in this case, for the synopsis, we do need to look at the internet. And then down here is where we choose our model. So this is a really, really cool part of how Airtable has set this up, is that we don't rely on just one AI model that Airtable has chosen for us. They actually give us access to most of the mainstream AI models. And so we can choose from a whole number of OpenAI models. We can also use models from Anthropic, Meta, and Google. And you can also see that a lot of these are labeled low cost. And so I mentioned credits before, and watching credits, this is another great way to limit credit usage. So, if we have something really complicated that we're having the AI do, maybe generate, like, write emails, or something where we want it to be really smart and be using the absolute most cutting edge technology, we might use one of the more modern models. So in this case, GPT 4.1. But in the case of getting a movie synopsis, I'm not really that worried about it. I think it's probably going to do fine, whichever one of these I pick. And so I'm just going to pick this GPT 4.1 mini, which is one of the lower cost options. And then I'm going to give it instructions. So if you've used ChatGPT, this is just like writing a prompt. We're going to tell it what we want here. So in this case, I'm going to say, write a synopsis of this movie. And then this is where it differs from using ChatGPT, because we can now insert the movie title. Write 3 sentences that describe the plot. I'm going to go ahead and click Create Field. And then it'll automatically run for these first few. So now I can open this up and see that a little red flower, it's got this nice little synopsis here that it pulled from the internet. And if I want to run any of these other ones and get a synopsis for those, I would just go ahead and click Run Agent. And then we can see the synopsis for that movie. So I think you're starting to get the idea, but I will do a couple more. So I'm going to do one select and then one currency. So for select, the probably easiest one to think of here would be to get the movie genre. So if I go ahead and create a single select field type, this is going to be called genre. And let's give it some options: action, comedy, romance, thriller. And so just like the other field, if we want to use AI here, we're going to convert at the bottom to a field agent. And then I can give it instructions. And so the difference here is that we actually gave it those single select options, meaning that the output is only going to be those options that we gave it. So we can use the power of AI and the flexibility of it, being able to search the web and more subjectively decide which genre, but then we can give it those hard-coded options so that it doesn't come up with all kinds of weird other genres that we don't want. So I'm going to enable the internet search, and then in the instructions, I'll say, find the one genre that most accurately describes this movie. Then we'll insert the movie title. And then we've got our options down here. And if I go ahead and create field, oh, it looks like I already have a hidden field called genre, so I'll just say genre AI. And then we can see that it has gone ahead and done that. Tenet, thriller looks right to me. And these other ones are looking pretty good too. So lastly, let's do a currency field. So let's say we want to know the box office gross for each movie. I'm going to go ahead and create a currency field, and I will then convert to AI, find the blockbuster gross for the first 2 weeks of this movie. Then we'll go ahead and grab the title, create the field. And voila, we've got them. And before we move on, I want to just mention that I searched the internet with all of these fields, but we don't have to search the internet. And because we can reference other fields, we can often, do analysis based on just those fields. And that's also going to use fewer AI credits and so be cheaper. And so that's always a good thing to keep in mind. All right, now that we've covered field agents, we're going to move on to Airtable AI in automations. So I'm going to go to the automations area within Airtable, and then I will create a new automation here. And let's say that this automation, what I want to do with it is I want to email movie critics on the day of the release of a movie with some information about that movie and asking them to come see it. So let's call this email movie critics, and then the trigger is going to be when a record matches conditions in the movies table when release date is today. And in this automation, we're going to have two more actions. We'll have an action that writes the email text, and then we'll have an action that sends the email. And so to write the email text, we want to use an AI action. So I'm going to click this one, generate text with AI. And in the prompt, I'm going to say, write an email to an experienced movie critic asking them to attend the opening night of this movie. Then we will grab the movie title. Then we'll say, please include a 1-sentence synopsis of the movie based on this synopsis. And then I'll enter the synopsis. Value. All right. For this, we don't need to access the internet since we already have the synopsis and we're just rehashing it in a shorter format. And we can choose the model again. We could also adjust the randomness, so give it a randomness setting, which is, as I understand it, high randomness is kind of more creative. In this case, we don't really need to be that creative. So let's go ahead and click test action, run tests. And it's telling me that nothing matches the search query, meaning there are no movies that are being released today. So I'm going to have to go into the data here and change one of the release dates. So let's change Shockwave 2 to have our release date of today. And now if I go back here, test action, it'll give me that as an option to test. And now I can see the response, which is, dear critic's name, we are delighted to invite you to the opening night of Shockwave 2, an explosive thriller, blah, blah, blah. We hope you can join us for an unforgettable cinematic experience. This looks pretty good. Obviously, we might want to give it the critic's name and that kind of stuff. For our purposes here, we'll ignore that. And I'm going to go ahead and then click send an email. Then I could obviously choose the critic I'm going to send it to, give it a subject, which might be the title release night. And then we can click this little plus here in the body, email body area, and then click use data from that AI action. And then we can select it here. And so if I then generate a preview, I can see that it's going to my critic, and then we've got that AI text in the email. And that's how we use AI in Airtable automations. Now, I will say that because of the field agents, I almost never use this because you can imagine that we could have made a field that does the same thing, that writes an email to the critic for each record in the table, and then we could have just used that in the automation. And that happens a lot. In many cases, you could have accomplished the same thing in the data layer using a field agent. And so, I have found that I more commonly do that than use AI within these automation actions. But that said, I have had some places where it just didn't make sense to use it as a field agent, and this came in super handy. So this is definitely an awesome area to have the option to use AI. And that brings us to our last and really most interesting category for AI within Airtable, and that's the new Omni Assistant. So if I go back to here, I can see now this Open Omni little face or mouthless face. And if I click on it, it opens a chat. And I feel a little bit conflicted about Omni because on one hand, it's really cool. And I think out of all the features that they've released, it has the most kind of like unused potential. Like this could get better and better and add more and more cool features and competence over time. But at the moment, it feels a little bit rough around the edges, and certain things that it can do, it doesn't do super well. And so I'll kind of talk through a few of those things, but I think this is one of those things that's fun to explore and fun to keep on your radar because it will keep getting better. So the cool thing about Omni that gives it quite a lot of potential is that it actually has a lot of power to make changes within your base. So Omni can change field names. It can create new fields. It can create fields with formulas written in them. It can create automations. It can create interfaces. And so it is often a great way to get started with certain things. Omni can also change information within records, and it can also analyze information about your whole table or whole base. So starting there, analyzing data, we can see that it's actually made some suggestions too of what we might do. And so like it's suggesting, we can ask it about information about the movies in this space. So maybe we say, what is the latest release in the movie table? It's going to go ahead and give us Shockwave 2 because I changed that to today. I could also ask it to add up the total value of all of the blockbuster incomes of all these movies. And so, something like that where it's actually aggregating and summing information could be really useful. So let's say add up all of the value for each movie in the table. And there it is. It gave us a total number here for all of that, which matches the sum down at the bottom here. So it looks like it did that correctly. Now, going back to some of the things that I mentioned at the beginning, one thing it can do is edit or create fields. So you might notice that this title field is not capitalized. So I'm going to ask it, please capitalize the first field in the table. And it didn't let me do that, presumably because this is the primary field, meaning the leftmost field. We can test that real quick by changing the primary field. So let's say we change it to release date for now. And let's just say capitalize all fields in the table. And now it's saying Omni can't make changes to your base data. So this is really what I'm talking about, that it's rough around the edges. Omni can make changes to the base data, but clearly it doesn't always know that. And so, it really takes some experimentation at this point to get out of it what you want. Let's try this one more way. So I'm just going to say capitalize, or maybe I'll say rename the field title so that it's capitalized. And then it's going to ask us, because we have dependencies, so other fields that rely on the title, it's just telling us that we have those dependencies and asking us to confirm. I'm going to go ahead and click confirm. And there it went and capitalized it. So in that case, that took way longer than it should have. And, even if it didn't take that long, it would have been simpler just to double click on this and rename it. But there are ways that I've used this that really have saved a lot of time. So let's say, for example, that I want to create 10 fields all at once. And maybe I don't even know what those fields are yet. I just want to track more information about each of these movies. So I could ask it, what are the most common attributes about a movie that you might track in a base? All right, and I'm just going to note that I cut it out, but it took a while for it to return this. But when it did, it gave us this list here: title, release date, genre, director, cast, runtime, rating, content rating, language. A lot of really good suggestions here. And now that I've got this list, I want to ask it to actually create a field for each one of these. So I'm just going to say, please create a field for each one of these attributes, except for ones that already exist, such as genre. All right, here's another rough around the edges thing. It thinks that its response was that nothing else needed to be created. And so I'm going to just add a couple more prompts and see if I can get it to do what we want here. So I'm going to say, please provide a list of each attribute. Let's say a bulleted list, along with which field type it should be. All right, and now it actually is remembering what I asked before, that I wanted to not create the ones that already exist, and it gave me the new fields that should be created. And so, yeah, it says, would you like me to proceed with creating these fields? Yes. And it went ahead and created those fields. So that, again, took a little while, but honestly, even that, that amount of troubleshooting probably was worth it to create all of these fields and choose the field type. And I've definitely used this in a number of cases where this was really helpful and saved me a lot of time. And you can take a list from outside of here. So, maybe you're working with just your own ChatGPT dialogue in a different window and you got a list of fields from that. You could just copy and paste those into here and then ask it to create those fields. One thing I want to point out to you is that there is great documentation on Omni. And so if you're ever curious, what you can do with Omni, you can go to this page using Omni and AI in Airtable, and you can see all the different things you can do with it. So if we go to the Understanding Omni's Capabilities section, we can see these different main categories for how we can use it. We can ask it a question about the data. We already did that. We can have it analyze data. We had to do that too. We had to add information, but it can also find patterns or give you insights about it. And then we can have it build, create, or edit. So we can have it create a new table, view, field. We can have it create a new interface, an automation, edit data in one or more records, or have it rename a field. And so I think we've covered a lot of this, but I'm going to call attention to a couple more things that I think are pretty cool. The first thing is editing data. So if I go back into here, let's say that for some reason I want quotations around all of these movie titles here. In the past, I would have had to create an Airtable formula that would do that for me. But now, if it's something that I'm not going to have to do again, I just have to do it once, it's easier to ask Omni to do that. So I'm just going to say, add quotations around each movie title in the table. And so we could see that it first kind of scoped it out in here, and then it went ahead and did it. And that's pretty awesome. Another thing that Omni can do is actually pull things from a document that you upload. So an example of how you might use that would be, let's say you have a document that is a scope of a database that someone wants to create, and it actually has a list of all the fields that you want to create. You can go ahead and just click this little attach a file button, drop your Word document in that lists all of those fields, and then ask it to look at that document, take all those fields, and create them like we did with these ones here. And the last category of things that I want to call attention to within Omni is having it create automations, interfaces, and more complex fields like field agents. So if I wanted Omni to, let's say, create, that email that we had already created the automation for, I could just ask it to do that here. So create a new field that uses AI to write an email to a movie critic asking them to attend the release party. We can see that it created the new field, and if I open it up, I can see that it gave it quite a long prompt and asked it to look at the title, release date, director, and then give an output. And if I go ahead and generate, when it looks like the director, we didn't give it a director. So let's see here. Oh, okay. So it references the director field, but there is nothing filled out for that director. And so one thing that we can do if that's the case, and we sometimes won't have a director filled out, is we can make it optional. So any of these inputs that we reference, we can make them optional, and then the AI will not, be hesitant to generate text when they're missing. I think we also want to enable internet search. For some reason it didn't do that. Maybe it's not allowed to do that. And then I'll go ahead and run this agent. And then we've got this nice email that is written. For that email, we could then ask it to create an automation to send it. So this would be a replacement to the automation that we already created, but I could say create an automation that sends an email to critic@gmail.com on the release date of each movie, and make the email body with the text in the email to critic field. All right, it created an automation that triggers when a record matches conditions when the release date is today. That's great. That's how we did the other one. And then it's going to send an email to the email address that I gave it, and it's going to use that value. So, it looks like we might need to do a little editing here. Here is the email. We would want to delete that. But I mean, this, got us really far. And again, a lot of these things are time saving more than anything. And certainly this would have saved me some time. The last thing that I want to show you with regard to asking Omni to create things, or looking at what Omni does in general, is creating interfaces. And this is really the thing that I think, honestly, I use the least, because interfaces, if we just have it create interfaces, it's gonna maybe make different charts, different whole pages that are not exactly what I want. With an interface, I'm really trying to pinpoint a very specific aesthetic, or I really know an exact thing that I want to see. And so it's unlikely that Airtable is going to guess that. The way that I would use it and have used it in the past, however, is if you just want some ideas, like maybe you don't really know what kind of charts you want from this table, but you want to see what Airtable might suggest, we could go ahead and say, create an interface that shows high level charts about the info in the movies table. Show us some interesting insights. All right, and it has created this insights dashboard that shows us the total number of movies, and it's got an average movie rating, which is not showing a value, probably because we haven't entered movie ratings. That's one of the new fields that it created for us. And then, a lot of these other things are the same thing, like they probably are not showing information because there aren't data for those fields yet. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to see, okay, correlation between movie ratings and budget. That does sound like something that I would want to have in a chart where I'm tracking that information. And so again, this is probably more useful for giving you ideas, and then you could either just delete the whole interface or delete the parts that you don't want. So is it game changing? No, but is it useful in certain situations? Definitely. And that's kind of how I would characterize Omni in general, is that, a lot of it feels kind of gimmicky for the moment, but occasionally I will be doing something and remember that it has that capability, such as creating 10 fields at once, and it will save me quite a lot of time to do it. So it's good to know about, and it's good to keep an eye on as they keep making it better and better. Congratulations, you made it to the end, which means that you know which AI features will be the most useful to you in your Airtable pursuits. To dive deeper into specific AI features, check out these tutorials which break down how to set these features up from scratch.